So there's a bit of a lull right now in terms of big video game releases, so I thought, you know what, it's time to tackle the backlog. Games that I've missed over the last few years, or just games from my own personal pile of shame. I absolutely adore a good first person shooter. Titanfall 2, Wolfenstein the New Colossus, the original Black Ops campaign, and of course, the Halo series. In 2023, a debut game from Ascendant Studios under the EA Originals banner launched called Immortals of Aveum. It scored okay, sitting at a fair 72 on OpenCritic, and it currently sits at a mostly positive 73% score on Steam. Unfortunately, the game underperformed, and in April this year, the studio furloughed most of its staff. 2023, it was a special year for video games. I never found the time to check this one out because of how jam-packed it was, and now I have. I think it's pretty good, but it's a fair reflection of a wider problem of how 7 out of 10 games are perceived now. Scoring a 7 is widely viewed as a bad score in the greater context of the industry, and in a year as busy as 2023 was, it meant that that kind of score, it makes that game skippable. I find that a shame because, look, what's here, it doesn't reinvent the wheel of a single player first person shooter campaign, but it's got heart, and it recognises what video games as a first person shooter should be. Fun. It's a game that's now on EA Play and Xbox Game Pass, and it's regularly on sale for about 15 quid. Look, we've had some masterpieces over the last few years, there's no doubt about it, but sometimes there's more fun to be had with a 7 out of 10 game. The imperfections of a 7 out of 10 can actually be more interesting to me than what a 10 out of 10 can be. Sure, there's some pretty bad MCU style dialogue here, and yes, the side activities are a little uninspired, but this game did charm me. A protagonist that, whilst goofy, I quite liked. A setting that felt a little different. And did I tell you about the part where I can shoot lasers out of my hand like a javelin or a shotgun? I think Immortals of Aveum deserves a second chance. Here's why I should give this one a try. Let's start with the main appeal of this game. It's Doctor Strange meets Call of Duty. I've always found that lasers in particular in first person shooters, the toughest to get the feedback right. Playing on mouse and keyboard, I really enjoyed it here. So you get access to 3 kind of weapons. Your blue magic, which is like your DMR or a javelin, kind of mid to long range. Your red magic, which is your close range shotgun. And your green magic, which is like seeker magic, more your SMG assault rifle kind of stuff. What's cool is you can tweak depending on your preference and what you have equipped. So like I say, the blue magic, I opted for the strike bolt over the javelin because I love the feedback and the higher rate of fire of that. From the off though, I do think you get that immediate power fantasy. The abilities have a nice-ish weight to them. Also, like, you get an almighty, all-powerful beam. The hands do this whole whoosh whoosh, and you explode some powerful beam out your hands, and it feels great. Look, you will have to do some key rebinding because, let me tell you, there's a lot of shit going on as you progress through the game. Swapping through different magics, using your abilities and then your non-lethal abilities. It can be a lot, and sometimes a little overwhelming, that is for sure. Different enemies will pose different problems, but are dealt with also in certain ways. So, some enemies will glow in the colour of one of your magic attacks, meaning the only damage you can do to them is through that kind of attack. Sometimes they'll also get a buff correlating to a certain type of magic, so a green buff means they'll gain health regen, or a blue buff means they'll put a shield around them, and a red buff gives them armour. I do think that combat does have a pretty nice flow state to it though. The ability to stun enemies, to slow them, grapple around, then chain together your powerful abilities, and when you get in that flow state, you do feel cool as fuck. There's actually quite a good amount of enemy types here, and honestly, I was challenged and I died a good few times on normal difficulty. Sometimes those challenges felt a little unfair, as me for example, I spec'd a lot into blue magic, so when enemies are invulnerable to that, I felt a little underpowered at times. Speaking of spec'ing though, you do have your usual skill tree here, so you can spec into the 3 different types of magic. So you can spec into blue or red or green, but To progress my blue, I'd also have to spec into my red and get like adept in that, for example. It's fairly simple stuff like extra damage, invulnerability, crit damage, but also within that you can level up your abilities. So these abilities are called Fury Mana, more powerful attacks that are spent on a meter. Honestly though, out of all the combat, some of these abilities are actually the most underwhelming parts. Visually and feedback aside, maybe apart from Shatter, I never found them particularly satisfying. Okay, maybe the big wind up punch, but at the same time, when you also chain a few of them together in a row, you do feel like a Prime Sorcerer Supreme. That's where the fun of this game is though. It's in that 7 out of 10 nature. It offers up something different, and other than Ghostwire Tokyo, I don't really think there's a game like this. And whether that's fun for you for 5 hours or the 11 hours that it took me to finish this game, I think the combat is always a good time. Not to mention, this game is built on Unreal Engine 5 and they absolutely show that. Combat is extremely flashy with big splashy particle effects, and the ripple effect of some of the spells, you feel them and you see them across the battlefield. At times it's artistically amazing, and at times it's generic and quite bland. I don't think as a whole the game is bland, but it's that kind of sci-fi medieval. I guess arcane punk is the correct term for it. There's one mission where you traverse across the sea on some giant walking statue, and it's gorgeous. But then other areas feel, again, that kind of bland nature. It's hard to describe. I wouldn't say just generic Unreal assets, but not much inspiration behind them. More like ticking biomes off. The character designs though, they are top notch, and the cutscenes are incredible looking. When you get the scale of some of the bigger fights in this game, it's like, alright, go grab your popcorn, this is a spectacle. It's kind of how I describe playing the game as a whole. It's a good time at the movies. It's no emotional roller coaster, no harrowing drama. It knows you're going to be entertained, and the combat, the plot, and the environment are always in service of that. It is the video game equivalent of an MCU movie, and I know that can sound like a dig to some people, but I mean it as a compliment. Where it's maybe not a compliment is in the plot. There's actually a really great cast here, and I'm here for anything that Gina Torres is in. She commands every scene here, and with what she has to work with, she's fantastic. Jack, who you play as, and that's the main protagonist, and you know what? I liked him. He may rub some people up the wrong way, but I thoroughly enjoyed his performance here. Between his more, I'm a cool motherfucker moments, when he's all powered up, or when he's a little more emotionally vulnerable. The plot itself though, I mean, look, it's not really memorable. To me, it acted as just like a decent enough through line for me going, pew pew wizard to you're all fucked now lads because I'm all powered and supercharged up, and it did just enough to keep me entertained throughout the entirety of it. Every moment that was big I saw coming, from self-sacrifices to motives behind what they're doing to what is going to be shock reveals, and it's all just quite telegraphed and not in a bad way. Just a lot of the big moments aren't earned, but there's also some moments that are. There's the usual MacGuffin, the usual unshocking reveal, but I never really cared for how cheap they felt because I don't think the game takes itself too seriously either. It does try the whole he's behind me isn't he humour, and although some of it didn't click, some of it did, and a few moments did actually get a good laugh out of me. It's a feel good video game, even if what the themes is trying to go for is quite deep. I think if you play this, you're looking for something that's feel good and fun. Speaking of feeling good though, it did have some really fun boss fights. There's simple mechanics to these, and sometimes it is just a pure bullet sponge, but some of them are big and challenging. Combining abilities, sussing out weak points, and then targeting them. It always delivered a satisfying feeling of overcoming them, whether that be a new spell granted to you, a new piece of gear which I'll touch on in a minute, or your health is buffed. The gear then. So, remember how I mentioned the blue magic can be like a DMR or a javelin? That's based upon the gear you have selected. There's 4 rarities: common, rare, epic, and legendary. I bet you've not heard that one before. Each level boosts base damage and then some kind of augmented perk like extra damage or crit damage or cooldowns or something like that. But the gear selected will determine what kind of attack it is, so if it's a javelin attack or the DMR, so you can select it based upon what your preference is. The gear is obtained both linearly through the game's story, by beating the missions or the bosses, but there's also a semi-open world here full of puzzles and paths to unlock chests. The gear itself can be upgraded or even crafted through a golden chest which increases its base damage or those perks that I spoke about. The puzzles then. Honestly, some of them were pretty engaging and fun to work out, but I'll be honest, I just mainlined the campaign because I wasn't really compelled by the world enough to go out and actively seek the puzzles, but those that were either on the main path or just off it, I enjoyed doing enough. Some are pretty complex, some are extremely easy, and it was a nice balance actually, I can't complain too much. There's a lot of busy work to do if you want that, but the game also respects your time in that if you just want to mainline its campaign, you can do. The open world does have combat trials, puzzles and traversal-like challenges, and the mainline traversal challenges I found really fun, whether you're grappling from zone to zone or slowing an object down to then be able to run across it in time, jumping and hovering. It felt pretty slick actually. Look, I don't score video games because I think assigning a number is daft to me, but I get it. This is what they define as the 7 out of 10 video game, but I also think we need the 7 out of 10s. These games are important to the industry, and the fact that this being that 7 out of 10 had the negative repercussions is a shame. This is a game that is packed with fun, it's got a lot behind it, it's not a half-arsed product, and also there's a lot of lore if you want it here. A lot of world building is done to set the scene, and it does feel like it was intended to be the start of a franchise, and I definitely think it had the foundation to be one. Its story is pretty bad, and its writing it's just okay. Its world activities are pretty generic, but sometimes you just want to be engaged in a video game to shoot magic out of your hands and feeling fucking powerful, and you got Gina Torres telling you that you're a proper dickhead. So, do yourself a favour, play the 7 out of 10 video games, try Immortals of Aveum, become an immortal, why not? If you've stuck around to the end, I appreciate your time and you watching. Have you played Immortals of Aveum? And if so, what did you think of it? Do you have a game that's kind of classed as a 7 out of 10 video game that's a favourite of yours? And if so, what is it? As always, clicking the like button really does help me out. And if you enjoyed this kind of vid, consider subscribing because I like to focus on the shit I enjoy here. Talk about the stuff that I like more than dislike. So if you're into that, consider subscribing. I'd love you to stick around. As always, all my socials are linked in the description down below, so follow me on those. Other than that, have a terrific day, look after yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.